Hi Debbie.
Hi Ellie.
Glad to see you got the memo about the cardigan.
I did indeed, on the same page.
This week we're just exploring a bit more the living in the generous love of God, and I wondered whether you could just explain that a little bit more for me, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great, doesn't it, to be able to live in God's generous love, but what does that mean for my life as I live it out? And one of the things I'm hoping we'll explore in the session is, how do we bring our day-to-day lives, because that's the only place that I can experience God's love. It's very tempting to think, when I've got a bit more time, I'll explore what that looks like. When I retire, when my children grow up, and so our lives just disappear. And I think God wants us to know this love in the midst of our often very ordinary, frustrating, difficult, messy lives. So what would that look like to invite God in to my commute? What would it look like to invite God into my work situation with a boss who's demanding and difficult? What would it look like? You can fill in the gap. And so how do we learn to close the gap between perhaps the secular and the sacred? Does that make any sense, that expression? Sort of.
Yeah, I think it does, and it puts me in mind of a time when I was grieving, very badly grieving, and I came across a prayer that was about inviting the Trinity, inviting Father, Son and Spirit into my grief. But the prayer didn't just say, I invite you into my grief. It said, I invite you into my anger. I invite you into my confusion. I invite you into my pain. And it was a revelation to me. It's like, oh, I don't have to sort these feelings out before I can come before God. I can invite God into my grief, my anger, my confusion, my pain. I can ask him to meet me where I am. I don't have to move myself forward before I can encounter God's love.
That's such a helpful analogy, Ali, because I think, don't we often think that we're not acceptable with this mess of life to God, and that I'll come when I'm sorted.
Yeah.
And then we miss out because God said he knows it anyway. So it's really interesting that we try to tidy ourselves up to be acceptable to God, where he longs to be invited into whatever we experience, but he won't push his way in. I think it's the invitation, will you allow me in? And so perhaps we can explore in this session, what would that look like? How? And I think we often think the how is they're big things. But Ali, you mentioned to me when we were chatting earlier about a little practice you have to turn your mind and heart to God. Do you mind just sharing?
Yes. So whenever I have to change my password for my computer at work, I always put something into that password that makes my mind turn towards God. And because I have to put my password into my computer, feels like several times an hour, let alone during the course of the day, but just something that just makes me think, oh yeah, hi God, be with me in this, whatever it is that I'm doing. And I find that really helpful.
I think for me it was an impatience in driving and getting so frustrated with red traffic lights. So I decided to reframe red traffic lights, that they were I can stop, and how would you like me to engage with you? If there's someone on my mind that I could pray for, but it stopped the frustration that I had to stop at the red traffic light, and it was an invitation and a reframing of that moment. So I hope this session will explore what that looks like for all of us. Thanks, Ali.
Thanks, Debbie.